What is it like to die? In Search of examines new evidence.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Dr. Thomas Rockwell is on intimate terms with death. As head of the emergency room at Santa Monica Hospital in California, he treats over 90 patients a day who are on the outer edge of life.
Somebody's standing in my chest. Take a deep breath.
Rockwell is one of many doctors caught in the debate over what is the end of life.
Sit up for me.
The medical definition of death has been challenged by the advance of science.
We're all composed of billions of cells. These cells depend on each other for their survival, but each of them has a lifespan of its own.
EKG, and I'd like to get a portable chest film.
Dr. Rockwell, CPR.
Code blue.
2, 3, 4.
In the past, death has been defined as the point at which the heart stopped beating.
Count of 5, I'm going to defibrillate.
4, 5.
1, stand back, go.
But we've come to find out that some of the cells in the body can live on for a considerable length of time after the heart stops beating. Now we have redefined death to mean death of the cells in the brain. Now it's very difficult sometimes to tell when that has occurred. If you use the definition of death used to be used, many patients who would have been declared dead under those criteria are resuscitated and regain consciousness and go on and live a useful life.
The medical profession's dilemma over the definition of death has startling implications for everyone. What is it like to die? For centuries, man has turned to his priests and wise men for answers. There were no first-hand accounts to go by. Now, due to advances in medical science, there are a few among us who claim to know what death is. Not scientists or doctors, but people who have technically crossed the line between life and death. Western custom is to mask the pain of dying and the sting of bereavement. But the accounts of those who have died and been brought back to life are remarkably similar in that the experience seems not to have been an unpleasant one at all. The words they choose may be different, but their stories lead to the same astonishing conclusion. One account goes, "I lost control of my car on a curve, and I remember thinking, this is the end. I felt like I was tumbling through a long tunnel, and then suddenly I found myself floating over the scene of the accident." Another victim describes his experience this way. "It happened years ago. I was playing in the pool with my brother when I lost my breath. I kept bobbing up and down, and then suddenly I was engulfed in blackness. I could hear a soft, vibrating sound in my ear like wind chimes, and then I was above my body, watching them pull me out of the water and pound on my back." A third account also stresses the feeling of euphoria. "I was on the steps when the heart attack came. I collapsed and then felt myself go out of my body. The next thing I knew, I was in a rolling field, too beautiful to describe. I was overcome with a feeling of utter peace and tranquility." Many have been reluctant to tell others of their encounters with the unknown, but a few have begun to speak out publicly.
In 1970, I was diagnosed and told I had Hodgkin's disease. And at the time, I was unable to have any treatment because I was pregnant. and both medicine and radiation treatment were not appropriate at that time.
Catherine Hayward knew she was dying. Her disease advanced to the final stage. She made plans to have her children cared for and prepared to enter the hospital with no expectation of leaving.
I was 27, critically ill, terminally ill. Began getting weak, very weak, in June 1973, and called my best friend Anne, who took me to the hospital.
They took her immediately into the emergency room and began to try to locate veins so that they could get some blood from her. And after that, they took her to the coronary care unit.
Then it happened. I was lying on my side, and I looked over at the heart monitor, and the line went straight across. The next thing I knew, I was standing over my body, looking down at the form in the bed. I watched the nurse beside the bed, adjusting the wires, and I was fascinated by it. I kept wanting to tap her on the shoulder and tell her that I wasn't there. Then I saw this team of nurses and this little green thing on wheels coming toward the bed, and they were in such a hurry, it really scared me. So I turned and stepped into a tunnel, I guess you'd call it, because it definitely had sides, and I definitely felt confined. And I started moving upward, and I felt exhilarated. But when I got to the end of the tunnel, there was this light that was so bright, I thought would hurt my eyes. Then I saw him about 150 feet ahead of me, and it was the figure that I knew to be God.
They began punching on her chest and thrusting some sort of instrument down her throat to help open up her passages so that she could breathe. Kathy wasn't responding.
I said, please don't make me go back. Please let me stay here with you. I sounded like a spoiled child, and I was really, really hanging on. Finally, he just took me and firmly but gently pushed me away from him and said, you must go back. There is a task that you have to do for me. And if you do this, you will come to me. And then he turned and he walked away. And I was furious.
They had somehow managed to start her heart again and to start her breathing again.
The doctor that was standing over me said, we've put the tube past her lungs into her stomach, and apparently they were pumping air into my stomach instead of into my lungs. And they said that's what was causing all this tremendous pain as I was experiencing as I was coming to, but I knew it wasn't that. I knew I was resisting coming back in the body. I felt a quiver running up and down my body, and I felt rage, and I felt like I didn't belong there. So there I was, and not speaking, and all of a sudden, the line went straight again. Saw this nurse come running in, and she took the portable oxygen tank down, and I watched all this, and I watched her put the mask on me. Even though the line went straight, I still saw all this. I saw the bed being pushed down the corridor towards the intensive care unit. That's the last thing I remember seeing before I left my body again. I was immediately in the light. I was immediately in God's presence again. And he just took me in his arms and very gently said, do you understand? I said, yes, I do. And then I came back into the body with just the easiest breath. I signed myself out of the hospital. I left the hospital, and I haven't been back.
3 years later, Catherine's physician reports that she has no trace of Hodgkin's disease. Catherine was recently remarried, and she and her husband Jim have started a new life. Catherine's story is not unique. The out-of-body experience has had a great impact on others who have come close to death.
Over the last several years, I've been involved on various levels with several hundred people who have died, and intimately involved with about 100.
Dr. Charles Garfield is a psychiatrist at the University of California Cancer Research Institute.
A number of years ago, I was teaching a class at UC Berkeley called Psychology of Death. I got a letter from Shelley Ruderman in which he described his experiences some 12 years prior, in which he was dealing with a life-threatening illness. In fact, he was dealing with a seriously advanced lung cancer. The emotional tone of both the letter and the subsequent meetings we had spoke really powerfully to me about the powerful emotional reality they represented in the present.
Doing something that I really like to do.
Yeah.
Sheldon Ruderman's encounter with death began in 1960. The experience had a profound effect on him and changed the direction of his life. He now counsels cancer patients like Micah Friedman and believes that the power of the mind can reinforce medical treatment. Thus far, the results have been positive.
When's your birthday again?
January 29th.
Right. Okay, by January 29th, if we keep doing this, keep doing what the doctors tell you to do, it's going to be gone. When I asked my surgeon what he thought, he gave me less than 2 years to live. Like a lot of other cancer patients, my original diagnosis seemed to me unbelievable. I mean, somehow it still seemed a little unbelievable. Less than 2 years to live was somehow not within my emotional capability at that point. So I communicated this back to the doctor, and I said, look, I'm not going to die, and your task is to help me in how not to die. You tell me what to do. But I'm not going, because I have to stick around now.
In my research, approximately 15% of the people I work with have what might be described as death-accepting attitudes. A sense of the basic all-rightness of their death, that the death feels appropriate to them. That's a pretty small percentage, 15%. Many other people are angry, furious, in the sense that Dylan Thomas was furious, raging against the dying of the light.
Okay, I survived an 8-hour operation in which my surgeon did what he later described was the best surgery of his life. I came out of that. I felt physically violated, and no one had prepared me for these kind of feelings. 17 days after this major operation, my surgeon finally walked in, and he said, well, Shelley, we got a problem. We got a mechanical thing that we're going to have to correct. There's a valve that's fouled up in there, and it's making some kind of mess. But it's really a minor correction. I'll have to take you back in the operating room. But it's such a minor thing, we won't have to give you a shot. They took me back into the operating room, and I was on the table now, sort of face down. And since this is a teaching hospital, there are like now about 25 students in the room surrounding the table. And I couldn't believe what was happening. He was cutting me open, I was wide awake. One of the things I originally was trained in myself was engineering. What was perfectly obvious to me was that of the 25 people in the room, very few could see the surgery. So what I did was sort of like a little engineering thing. In my mind, I built a board coming out of the wall in back of me, which would go right over the table, right above the body. I'd be able to look down, no one would block the view. It was just, mind play. No sooner had I thought of that when my consciousness was on the ceiling watching this operation. I have to say at this point that the guy that I was at that time was somebody who thoroughly disbelieved in anything that was psychic. I was a very scientific character. I was an atheist, very pragmatic. I didn't believe anything I didn't see. Here I was experiencing something that was impossible. My consciousness was on the top of the room, watching them operate on my body. The view looking down was very clear when it came to the people watching the surgery. I could see all of the students very clear. When it got to the outlines of the table that I was on, it got fuzzy. When it got to the outlines of my body, it got fuzzier yet. And when it got to the wound itself, where he was actually operating, I could not see.
People have the sense of leaving their bodies, of rising above their bodies, and of drifting throughout the room, of being aware of images, of being able to see the room, to see the world from a different point of view, to be able to see their own bodies lying in the bed, and in essence, to be detached from the physical body.
Now, about every 15 minutes or so, my surgeon asked me how I was doing. Somehow, I had to be back in the body to answer those questions. And I would say, all right, and then I'd get out again. I mean, while there was something going off someplace that said, this is impossible, the rest of it felt completely normal.
I think the important part is that we're not just generating pictures in our mind out of anxiety, that somehow there appears to be a contact with a level of reality that we don't normally address.
I felt like I was within, at the most, 24 hours of dying if I let myself die. And somehow it did not seem at all incredible at this point that it was up to me whether I lived or died. And that's something I never would have believed before, but it seemed totally obvious right then.
He had come as a natural scientist, as a scientist from the conventional mold, and had had an experience that totally baffled him. Another thing was the fact that he was quite convinced that he was responsible, largely responsible, for his survival. That his will to live, his powerful sense of having to stay alive, in Shelley's case for the sake of a newly born son, was the ingredient that enabled him to survive an outrageous set of experiences.
My wife did, you know what, in retrospect, was pure genius. There were no kids allowed on this ward, but she knew what it was I was trying to save my life for. So she took our kid, who was 6 months old, put him in a shopping bag, hid him, brought him up, brought him into my room, and in fact reminded me what the whole thing was about. When I saw him, it was like, that cinched the question. I had to stay alive. Let's go in your chest, where all the red soldiers are. So let's call them and tell them all to bring their squirt guns. And when they're all following you, we'll go into the other room where all the white soldiers are and tell them to bring their squirt guns. Tell all the soldiers to shoot all that gooey stuff into the holes in the monster, plugging up all those holes. And as the gooey stuff goes in there, watch the monster get smaller. Just watch the monster shrink. What the out-of-the-body experience did, what I became aware of, was that whether I lived or died did not depend on the kinds of rules that the doctors understood. The other thing that I think has been a major transformation is that I don't believe, as I did at the time this experience unfolded, that the end of life was the end of everything. I believe now very strongly that there is a life after death.
My personal belief is that there is continuity, that it would be outrageous for me at this point to believe that this was all there was. If you ask me what I know for sure, I'm in the same ambiguous position that the rest of the human race is in.
I feel sure to myself that there is something that transcends beyond when you die. I have to say that the out-of-the-body experience was probably the key thing, because it is very hard once you realize you can have your consciousness and your body to separate not to at least entertain the idea that even when your body is gone, your consciousness may go on.
Independent accounts of the out-of-body experience are remarkably similar. What they tell us about the nature of human consciousness may have great significance. The fact that the experience cannot be adequately explained by science has led many to question the finality of death. Is there life after death? Today, there are many who've gone over the brink and returned to tell us about it. They do not offer proof of life after death, but their reports give us a new perspective on the possibility that death is not an ending, but a beginning.